South Africa's Financial Intelligence Center has established a forensic unit to help the government fight corruption and prosecute complex financial crimes, part of an effort to ensure that the nation is removed from a global watchdog's dirty money watch list. The unit, which complements the FIC's existing structures, is said to be one that is hoped will bring about some sort of existing structure in the terms of expediting issues around asset forfeiture and prosecutions. The FIC is mandated to assist in identifying the proceeds of crime and combat money laundering, including the financing of terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Earlier in the year, the Financial Action Task Force announced that South Africa has been added to its grey list. The country did poorly in its 2019 mutual evaluation by the FATF and was subsequently put under a one-year observation period in October 2021 to give it time to address 67 recommended actions by the FATF following the evaluation. In January 2023, an assessment of South Africa's progress found that the country had managed to reduce the 67 recommended actions to 8 strategic deficiencies. The FATF then took the decision to grey list South Africa until the deficiencies are addressed. This morning, Clive Ramathibela Smith, a business and market analyst, joins us to discuss this. Thank you so much, Clive, for joining the conversation.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Now, the issues surrounding terrorism financing, proliferation of weapons, and of course money laundering is not only peculiar to South Africa. Other countries all over the world are equally within this mix. But then South Africa has been grey listed by the FATF. Should that happen to the country?
You know, one of the criteria that was recommended back in 2019 was to switch the South African financial system. You would remember that the Financial Services Board, which was then known as, also changed its name and adopted an Australian financing system, which is a twin peak that was supposed to somewhat regulate more rigorously, but also allow for more transparency. We've had things change in 2018. We also had what was called the POPI Act, which is protection of private information on individuals, which led to such an extent that people like the Guptas, those of you who are familiar with South African history, who were busy doing corruption, the banks could now take action directly and stop them by freezing their assets concurrently. So all these efforts have been made to try and streamline and put more rigorous action to making sure that the financial system is strengthened and that the money laundering acts have been in conjunction with what's happening globally. These are a string of things and actions that have been taken by South Africa. And yes, we understand why they have to be taken. But although I must say some of these are very, very myopic, in the sense that they're not going to necessarily change the way people do things when they transact or when they do deals in South Africa.
All right, talking about deals and transactions between South Africa and the international community, the country was actually added on February 24. Now, looking at the time span in between that, how would you say it has affected the country's economy and its relationship with foreign banks, institutions, and of course, multilateral and multinational organizations?
So it would be very unfair, in actual fact, my brother, to give a true reflection. I mean, it's just over a month. We haven't really seen that much of activity. Where we can identify certain factors that have contributed or indirectly shifted the way the world looks at South Africa is when it comes to things like currency, for example, where we have a situation where the rand has weakened to its worst performance in almost a decade. And also, we've also seen the collaboration between the increment of South African Reserve Bank interest rates and also the strength that has had, or rather the negative effect that has had on the consumers in the domestic economy. All these factors, although singularly they can be stretched out to other global economic activities, but yes, the way the banks operate in South Africa, how stringent they've become. They've been very, very difficult in actual fact. And so that's why we were shocked to even be listed on the 24th of February into the grey listing. However, the establishment of this task force, the establishment of these analysts who are going to now regulate how financial transactions happen, that will definitely enhance on what we already have as structural reinforcement for financial crimes in the country. And it's going to go a long way, obviously, but we do believe that these constructs can sometimes be very, very negative to economic development in especially developing countries.
So, are you saying that this forensic unit that has been newly established is one step closer to dealing with the issues of corruption in South Africa? Because we've been inundated with stories as regards corrupt practices and topical figures in the country. So do you think that this would decisively deal with that and change the perception that the international community has about South Africa?
Are you meaning the president? No, so there are gaps, my brother. There are gaps, and it's going to be difficult to have a coordinated effort to try and close those gaps in a very short period of time. The president wants this to happen in the next 6 months. I doubt that will happen. The shortest period that we've had a country on the grey listing was about 18 months. So it takes time. And that's why these things have to be tested, tried, and to be seen to be doing something. And I think to be seen to be doing something is what the president is similarly trying to do, which is not the right way that the task force will look at. They want to see results, outcome-based results. What action did you take? What was the result of that? And how did it impact on you controlling how finances are being done in your country? So it is a very difficult thing to measure in a short period of time. However, you can start to see the results based on the functionality of those things being in place. So, for example, I'll give a very good example. The South African Revenue Services this year collected more money than they've ever done in their history. They've gone up by almost 40%. They're going to, for the first time, collect 2 trillion rand worth of tax money. Now, how did they do this? 2 years ago, they established a task team, and that task team was made up of 500 analysts who are going to chase up on people who are not paying their taxes. Have they been successful? Of course, it's a resounding success, because now we see 2 years later, they've been able to collect more money than they've ever done in their history. What does this mean? It means that if you put together policy and you make sure that the implementation of that policy resonates with the people and they understand the consequences of doing what's wrong, therefore you have a result. The result is people to stop doing what is wrong. And by so doing, it means you've decreased the criminality in that element from taking place. And that's how you do it. That's how you know that it is working. So even in this instance, the establishment of this particular organization or this particular group is not enough. What will be enough is the result which they yield about a year and 18 months from now, when we can be able to reflect and say, when did we establish this organization? What did it achieve? What principles were applicable to it? And is there a result? And that result will therefore become the dipstick that says, yes, it was successful, or no, it was not successful.
All right, you've shown a bit of optimism in terms of what South Africa is doing in the different areas to tackle the issue of corruption in South Africa. But then I'd like to find out, in a case where South Africa, because a deadline has been set for January 2025, about a year plus. Now, what do you think would happen? What is the worst case scenario for South Africa? Because there's a desperation for it to get delisted from the FTF list. But then looking at what South Africa is doing now, what if it fails to meet that deadline again? What is the worst case scenario for the country?
I think, my brother, we are living in a very interesting time period in South Africa. One, the economy is in dire straits. We are going to grow less than 1% this year. Two, we have a very high level of unemployment in the country, and that unemployment, especially at the youth, which is about 40% at the current moment, who have qualifications and degrees but cannot seem to find work. Three, we have a gap that is massive globally. We are the most unequal society in the world, meaning that the people that they have, who are called the haves, have far more than what the have-nots have. And so that means that that gap keeps on spreading, which is very, very worrying. And so if we have a target, oh, by the way, there's one more element that's very important to this, and that is the fact that next year, South Africa is going to its national elections. So they'll be voting next year for the country's electorate. The question, therefore, is what would seemingly be a good note to go into an election with? Any political party knows if I'm going to be going into an election, I need to show, particularly if you're the incumbent, you need to produce results. You need to show the country is happy, the country's economic state is stable, the people are creating jobs, and therefore the economy is looking quite strong. However, when you're sitting with a plethora of bad news, like what the South African president is facing currently, it is very, very bad for you. And so if we miss next year's target again, and we are unable to then uplift ourselves and take ourselves out of this gray list, it will simply be another addition to the detrimental bad news that we've been having since the beginning of this presidency, where we see failure of policy, failure to implement economic change, failure to transact and transition into a new frame of work that will enable to engage us and create more opportunities for work for the young people of this country. It will be also in addition to the corruption that this presidency has seen on top of his head, including the likes of Phala, which is where they found somewhat of north of $500,000 in a couch in one of his farms. Yes, it is private money, but how did it get in here? And was it accounted for? Was it taxable? Was it announced at SARS that this kind of money was in the country? So when you have all these things that are building up against you as a president, and yet still you fail to do the fundamentals, which is to make the country look good outside, it becomes very difficult to attract investment. It becomes very difficult to make a statement or to make recommendations for yourself and your party to be voted into the next elections. And that is why they're sitting with the predicament that we might have, for the first time in South Africa, a coalition government in 2024.
Well, I must say, Clive, that's interesting choice of words that you used in describing President Ramaphosa's body language in terms of governance and fight against corruption. And I want to tie that to what he said recently. And he said that the grey listing of the country is concerning, but not as dire as some people have painted it. So I'd like to know what you make of that particular statement, because you are painting a picture of the fact that there's a need to stamp out corruption in the country. And you've talked about the fact that it is based on proper implementation of these policies. But then we are seeing a kind of statement coming from a president who might, even if you're going to tie to what you've said, might seem as though it's not so keen or it's not showing the kind of penchant that some people are actually looking for when it comes to dealing with corruption and the image that is not so good for the country. So what do you make of this?
I think you make a very good argument. And I think that the world needs to know that this corrupt state of affairs is indeed being propelled by the African National Congress, which is the ruling party at the moment. From every sphere of government, whether it be at the local level or at the national level, it seems like there is a very obvious ignorance of the deep entrenched corruption levels in his government. And one of the things, my brother, that was very critical at the beginning of his presidency back in 2019, in his first State of the Nation address, he was so eager to tackle this issue of corruption. And unfortunately, because now he's been entangled, excuse me to use the Smith's strategy there, but he's in an entanglement with corruption. And he cannot get himself away from it because his very party, which speaks about ousting corruption, is deeply entrenched in it. So it's very difficult now to separate the two. And part of the reason why we have been grey listed, and this was highlighted actually by some of the country's political analysts who say, If he had been seen to be clean, then maybe the grey listing might just not have happened. But now it happens in his tenure, and he himself is in the heart and soul of this corruption scandal. And on top of that, former President Thabo Mbeki wrote a scathing attack or scathing letter to the governing party saying that the fact that you don't want to even discuss this issue at parliament level shows that you are not yourselves taking corruption as a serious pandemic in the country. And so therefore it goes without saying that they are not serious about tackling corruption. So it will not be a surprise then, my brother. Next year, come the 25th January, we sit in the same pit hole, if not worse, and we are still talking about how we get ourselves out of the grey listing.
All right, finally, Clive, of course, we understand that with this particular issue, it puts a bit of restrictions or embargo, as it were, on South Africa when it comes to dealing with financial institutions in other climes. So now that we're having this, we are also aware that South Africa is trying as much as possible to solidify its bilateral ties with the Brics, which actually involves Brazil, Russia, India, China, of course, South Africa. But of course, looking at all this, you discover that it puts a dent and actually whittles down the South African economy. So now that South Africa is trying to strengthen its pact or its ties with the Brics, do you think it can help in any way to mitigate the impact that it is having currently on the country's economy?
Very, very, very good question. The issue about the Brics, I think they're a very strategic partner. I think that if they really do go ahead and implement this currency that is meant to compete with the dollar, that would be a fantastic thing to happen. But let's be realistic. Let you and I be realistic. What the Brics is facing currently. You've got China, which is a communist government. Not that they're not doing great economically, but there are some serious human rights violations that are taking place currently in China. And the leadership seemingly is not being trusted globally. One might argue maybe the West is playing political media reports, but the point is there are serious concerns about China and human rights, particularly when it comes to Taiwan and also Hong Kong. And then you look at Russia. Now, I mean, I don't have to say what's going on between Russia and Ukraine currently. We know the military force, the military operation that's taking place there, a full-on war, basically, that is taking place currently between Russia and Ukraine. And Russia now, as part of the Brics, is also we're anticipating that Mr. Putin will be coming to visit South Africa. Not so long ago, just off the coast here in Durban, we had military operations between South Africa and Russia as well. So it seems like there is an attempt politically to try and drive things more to the east as opposed to the west. And this relationship, obviously, there's good things that can come out of it. But if you look at the histories of the countries that are involved currently, even including the likes of India with human rights violations there, these countries are problematic. But they do have the strength in terms of economy, in terms of power, in terms of military might to convert and make this their own trajectory. But that's not to say that you cannot be doing it looking at the rule of law. And if you do it properly, then yes, there is an opportunity to create economic independence. But you cannot escape the fact that these countries have controversial things taking place in them. And even as Brics, it will take a hell of a lot for them to be able to conquer the likes of the West if they want to compete with the dollar as a currency. All
right, thank you so much, Clive. Well, let's just give South Africa the benefit of a doubt with this new forensic unit that has been created and see how it can go ahead to deal with the various challenges that have been identified by the FATF rather. Thank you so much, Clive, for joining the conversation. Appreciate that.
It's an absolute pleasure. Take care.